to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you'll never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, May 22nd, 2015. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Heading into the long Memorial Day weekend here, and hopefully there will not be any false flag stunts to disrupt the festivities here. Quick little program note, the What Really Happened radio show on Monday will be a repeat of an earlier show, and also Tuesday. I have some personal matters that are taking up my time next week, and so I'm going to take Monday and Tuesday off. I'll be back live on Wednesday, continuing the show. The website, of course, will be updated in a timely manner throughout the holiday here, but I need to take a little time away from myself. And I know I don't take a lot of time away from the radio show, so I hope you'll understand and forgive me on this one. Quick little program note, in hour number 3, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us with her unique perspective on the world. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, obviously, Monday is Memorial Day. The corporate media is loading up all the cable channels with all the movies that glorify war, and war is great, and we always win, and isn't it fun and glamorous? And obviously, there are some war movies that probably will not make the rotation, like All Quiet on the Western Front, Full Metal Jacket, Platoon, Deer Hunter, movies like that that don't exactly portray war in the best positive light. And I know HBO is stripping the entire band of brothers. They're out there just waving the flag as hard as they can. Over at whatreallyhappened.com, we put up Claire Rivero's In Times of War music video. We have put up a link to Mark Twain's The War Prayer, and also a link to Smedley Butler's article, War is a Racket. And for those few of you who don't know who I'm talking about, Major General Smedley Butler was this incredibly decorated Marine Corps officer, and he got caught up in this attempted coup d'etat by the bankers against Roosevelt. They recruited him to lead the military part of the takeover of the United States of America because he was immensely popular with the troops, and he pretended to go along with it until he had enough hard information, at which point he blew the whistle, went to Congress and said, these people are planning to overthrow the United States of America. Congress classified the whole situation. Roosevelt was unable to do anything about it because all of the Wall Street bankers simply said, the instant any one of us gets arrested, we will deliberately crash your fragile New Deal economy, and we'll make sure the media blames you for it. So Roosevelt was not able to do anything until the actual start of World War II, at which point he started arresting some of the plotters under the Trading with the Enemies Act. Smedley Butler is also famous because after he retired and he got away from that military, he wrote this treatise, War is a Racket, in which he laid out that these U.S. wars are not about democracy and freedom and the security of the homeland. They're all about grabbing other nations' resources for the profit of American corporations. And if you have not read War is a Racket, you need to. Sort of counter all of this red, white, and blue that they're waving at us over the weekend here. Now then, talking about our current wars, Barack Obama is calling the loss of Ramadi to the Iraqi people a setback, but denies the U.S. is losing to ISIS. Technically, he's correct. ISIS has become this broad brush that the U.S. paints to hide what's really going on. What's going on in Iraq is the people of Iraq want their country back from U.S. puppet rule. Same thing that's going on in Libya, same thing that's going on in Yemen. Over in Syria, the U.S. is using the paintbrush of ISIS to hide the fact that the people in there fighting against Assad are hired U.S. mercenaries. So it's a one-size-fits-all demon evil enemy. Now, John McCain is out there screaming that Obama's comment about not losing against ISIS is mind-boggling because McCain and the rest of the war hawks, they want the U.S. to immediately go to full-on total war against all the brown people at once. Get it over and done with here. The latest breaking news from Rita Katz and the Hindsight Intelligence Group. ISIS is now clubbing baby seals. We'll have a video of that, I'm sure. ISIS is tearing tags off of couch cushions. ISIS is passing wind in elevators and so forth and so on. Now, there's an interesting article over at Levant Report, and it has to do with a Defense Intelligence Agency document from 2012 in which they lay out how the U.S. was going to facilitate the rise of an Islamic State body to isolate the Syrian regime. This is more confirmation that ISIS is actually a creation of the U.S. intelligence system. Get a bunch of guys in uniform, get a flag, get a video production crew, make up a bunch of videos, get everybody to get their 2-minute hate on. And like Frankenstein, ISIS could break out of their control because a lot of people are saying, oh, ISIS is doing the good thing. ISIS could break loose and go rogue. It's happened so many times before. The U.S. actually created Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan to help kick out the Soviet Union. They broke out, went rogue in many cases. Israel's got a long history of creating controlled fake opposition that then breaks free and goes rogue. Shin Bet created Hamas as controlled opposition to Yasser Arafat's PLO so that Israel could play this game of we don't know who to talk to about peace. Is it Arafat? Is it Hamas? You know, until there's a unified government, why should we bother making peace talks? And then Arafat was assassinated, and all of a sudden Hamas woke up and realized it was the unified government of Palestine, and they broke free of their Israeli masters and started unifying Palestine and saying now's the time for peace talks. So the Israeli secret services set up the Palestinian Authority with their controlled asset Abbas, so that Israel could go back and say, well, we don't know who to talk to. History is full of governments creating the enemies they need to divide and conquer a target population, to keep you scared, divided amongst yourselves. Another story from Investment Watch blog, a video, fake news. CNN and BBC busted making fake videos. Last year, 2014, ISIS is a fake threat. It's Emmanuel Goldstein, right out of George Orwell's 1984. Now, William Crystal is chiming in here, trying to recover from this whole debacle over Iraq, where more and more people are saying we shouldn't have gone in there. There were no weapons of mass destruction. And the new spin coming from the war hawks, as typified by William Crystal, we were right to fight in Iraq. It was the right thing to do to go in and remove Saddam Hussein. And it doesn't matter that there weren't really weapons of mass destruction. This was a good thing for us to do. This was a success. So according to William Crystal, the U.S. killed a lot of people, bombed Iraq into rubble, utterly failed to accomplish any of the stated goals for the war because the nuclear weapons did not exist. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. Iraq was not supporting Al-Qaeda. They have left Iraq in utter chaos, setting the stage for the blowback underway right now, and Bill Crystal thinks this is still a success. I'd hate to see what it is he thinks is a failure. Now, 6 months after the fact, the Pentagon is admitting that, yeah, maybe, kind of, sort of, we killed some children in Syria, you know. They'll probably start taking a lead from those Georgia police. Well, if you're growing up in a country that we do not like, you're completely liable for the fact that we're cluster bombing your schools and stuff. More documents have surfaced confirming that the U.S. did smuggle weapons to opposition forces in Syria. That also ties up with Benghazi. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. So we're talking about this article over at News with Views. And they're talking about new additional documents surfacing, confirming that the United States government was smuggling weapons from Libya to their hired mercenaries in Syria. And apparently it was run by the same people who were doing the gun running by the U.S. government down to the Sinaloa drug cartel in Mexico, Fast and Furious. And the consulate at Benghazi was their headquarters. They were running it out of there. All right. So, now then, we seem to have a caller on the line. I don't have any idea who you are or where you're calling from, but what's on your mind? Hello? Okay, I guess it was a phantom phone call. All righty, getting on back to the situation here. Over in Yemen, Sana'a is, I keep mispronouncing that, it's still under attack, not going to end well. Iran is sending their aid ship to a UN facility at Djibouti to be inspected. It may be there already. The UN isn't going to find anything because Iran knows if they were actually caught smuggling weapons to Yemen, it's going to put more negative pressure on the P5+1 deal than is already there. Now, we have another story out of RINF.com, and this follows on the story we mentioned yesterday, where Poroshenko on BBC was out there declaring that Ukraine is already at war with Russia. And so a lot of people are starting to say, obviously Poroshenko is trying to provoke a confrontation with Russia. He's not even thinking about Donetsk or Lugansk or Crimea anymore. The only way he's going to stay in power is to get this full-on war with Russia going in his hope that Europe and the United States will leap on his side. And so Poroshenko is perfectly willing to see Ukraine become the key initiating battleground for the World War III ground war. And it is a reminder that we shouldn't allow these leadership positions to have too much power and privilege and authority. Because then you reach a situation where it is so attractive, people will do anything to get those positions. And once they have them, they'll do anything with them. And that is when the people of the nation really pay a hideous price. Article coming out of Middle East Monitor, U.S.-Israel duplicity over the Iran nuclear deal. And they're talking about how Obama is still trying to find some way to find a P5+1 agreement with Iran. Israel is adamant against it. Israel's minions within the United States are trying to find ways to derail it. But now Israel is willing to back off and let the deal go forward as long as the United States is willing to pay a price. And they're talking about billions of dollars, your tax dollars, for weapons to give to Israel with which to threaten their neighbors. And we ought to be really very careful about that. The other day they were talking about giving Israel the super bunker buster just in case Israel needed to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. Well, Israel could just go ahead and attack them because that's what they did to Iraq's civilian nuclear power plant up at Osirak back in 1981. Oh, they're building bombs. We have a right to go destroy it. And then, of course, inspections after the attack showed it had been just a nuclear power station. There was no clandestine bomb factory in the basement like Israel has underneath Dimona. But this new government that Netanyahu has put together is even more pro-war than its predecessor. And Israel's defense minister, Moshe Yaalon, who is a holdover from the previous cabinet, he's now out there saying, let's just go ahead and nuke Iran. We don't need a reason. We don't need an excuse. We have the ability to do it. That's all we need. Let's just go ahead and do it. And he's trying to equate this to the U.S. nuking Hiroshima and Nagasaki and saying that if it was okay to just kill a bunch of civilians there, it has to be okay here. There are some differences. There is no declared state of war between Israel and Iran. A lot of people question whether the United States needed to use nuclear weapons of mass destruction on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but let's be honest, Japan did get suckered into starting the war. Iran is not in the habit of attacking and invading other countries. They have not initiated a war of aggression, a war of conquest in over 200 years. Now, Israel's new deputy foreign minister, Hotovli, is out there with the statement, this land is ours, all of it. And basically saying that what the Bible says, from the Nile to the Euphrates, it's all theirs. The Palestinians should not be allowed to have any of it. No two-state solution. And is actually out there saying that the world should help Israel remove the Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank. Their arrogance just grows day by day by day. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. John in Barbados. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, this U.S. militarism that seems to be growing by the day. I mean, I am personally in favor of giving the U.S. military the opportunity to withdraw peacefully from Britain and Europe. But if they don't, use force. Force them out. Because I'm so sick and tired of this rubbish that comes out of America. The other thing is conspiracy theories. That's losing its potency because so many so-called conspiracy theories have been proved to be conspiracy facts.
Well, you know, the phrase conspiracy theory was actually invented in the aftermath of the Kennedy assassination as a pejorative to dismiss people as kooks who didn't accept the official story. But you're right. At this stage in history, so many of the so-called conspiracy theories have turned out to be absolutely true and correct that it really has lost its negative connotation, which is why it was kind of funny yesterday to have the White House out there saying that anybody who doesn't believe that it was Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad is just a wacko conspiracy theorist. And the burden of proof is on them.
Well, it seems amazing to me that the recent iteration of this conspiracy theory is ISIS are complaining about all these conspiracy theorists who say that the U.S. Intelligence agencies, UK intelligence agencies are involved. And it's causing them a failure to recruit people. It's diminishing their recruitment.
Well it should. And it's, you know, these propagandists got to be tearing their hair out because they were all trained and steeped in the methods and propaganda tactics of the 1950s and 1960s, and it just doesn't work anymore. But it's all they know how to do. And it really is, it's almost to the point of humor if so many people weren't dying for it. John, got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to our show here. And with reference to that last commercial you just heard, that idea of electronic pickpocketing, it's not a joke. It happened to my wife, Claire, I think it was 2 Christmases ago. And we had credit cards with those little radio links in there, which we did not ask for, by the way, because we recognized they were a problem. And just walking around the local shopping center during Christmas shopping, my wife's card got captured by one of these scanners that you can build for $50 worth of parts off of eBay. So we have a point of not having any credit cards with those little radios in there. But if you do, yeah, you got to do something about it because the government isn't going to stop all these electronic pickpocketers because it stimulates the economy. You're out there having to buy security for your computer and security for your wallet and security for everything. And anything that causes you to spend more money is a good thing. And that's why the government won't actually do their job. Because if they were actually doing their job in getting the criminals, you wouldn't have to go out and do it yourself and spend your own money to do it. See how it all works in a fascist economic dictatorship. All righty, getting on back to global news. As you know, Iran is demanding payment from Israel for gas that Israel got from Iran and sold prior to the 1979 Iranian Revolution, where they kicked out their U.S. puppet ruler, the Shah. And Israel has never paid for the gas they got from Iran. Iran is demanding it. They got a ruling from a Swiss court saying that this Israeli oil company has to pay for the gas they got from Iran and sold. And Israel's government came out and said, oh no, our laws prohibit us paying any money to anybody who's an enemy. So imagine my surprise. Israel is reneging on the deal and cheating Iran. But Iran is the bad guy here. And more and more people are starting to see through what Israel really is and how they really behave here. There's an article over in Counterpunch, Becoming a Global Pariah, Israel on the Run. And it says these are desperate times for Israel because the more Israel tries to force its view on the world, the more it tries to exert its control over freedom of speech and communication, the more it goes on hammering the people of Gaza and demanding money and weapons from the rest of the world because of something that in theory happened before we were all born. People are turning away from Israel. They're sick and tired of Israel's constant whining. So am I. And Israel's out there playing every card they've got, trying to drag the world back to where it was in the 1960s when we all loved Israel and thought Israel was great and we've got to support Israel. And there's another story that's come out here from PalestineLegalSupport.org, where they offer legal services to people who are basically attacked by Israel. And they're looking at this flood of accusations across college campuses in the United States of America, where students are being charged with anti-Semitism and even with support for terrorism. And just in the first 4 months of this year, Palestine Legal responded to 102 requests for legal assistance from students and faculty who are being hit with these charges of anti-Semitism and support for terrorism. And they found that all of these accusations are based solely on statements critical of policies of the Israeli government. That is the big fraud Israel's trying to put out, that criticism of what they do represents hatred of the Jews and anti-Semitism and support for terrorism. They're desperate to silence people. They're desperate to stop boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And people are starting to realize this is a hoax. Even over at Salon.com, they're saying, is being a critic of Israeli state policies the same as being an anti-Semite? And of course it is not. Anti-Semitism is hating somebody because they are a Semite, which also happens to include the Arabs, if you go by the literal definition of the word. We're not talking about somebody's religion, their ethnic background. They're from Khazaria. Who cares? We're talking about the behaviors of the government, the actions of the government, and a very few people in power in Israel. That's what we're criticizing. And Israel's government is trying to say, oh, you just hate the Jews. But if criticism of Israel's government is anti-Semitism, then criticism of the Nazis is anti-Germanism. And if you go down that slippery slope, then somebody's going to start saying all criticism of the U.S. government, no matter how well deserved it is anti-American, and therefore subject to silencing. Now, in this country, we have something called the First Amendment. And that First Amendment exists to recognize that people have a right to criticize bad government, including their own. And one of the reasons people in the United States and in France and in Canada and in Britain are waking up to what's going on is they live in countries where it's perfectly legal, even protected, to criticize their own government, but it's a crime punishable sometimes with prison to criticize Israel's government. And in the end, double standards and hypocrisy are the undoing of tyranny, because it drags that tyranny out into the light where people can see it. It's arbitrary. Fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force it to act like one where everybody can see it, and that's what's going on with Israel. They're throwing their weight around and saying, you can't criticize us. Israel's once again screaming that Obama is meddling in Israel's internal affairs. How dare you tell us how we're going to run our country? We're supposed to tell you how to run your country. You're not allowed to do that to us. Minister Levin basically is responding to Obama's criticism of Netanyahu and said, it's time for the West to wake up and realize that Israel struggles alone for the future of the world. That's a direct quote. And that statement only makes sense if Israel sees itself as the master of the world. And yes, many of them do. It's a bad habit they picked up from the U.S. in the last century here. However, even though Israel is upset at Obama's criticism of Netanyahu they are still willing to accept that $1.9 billion in new weapons sent as a gift to Israel's incoming racist government by the United States, meaning you, the taxpayer here. Now, getting on over to Russia and Ukraine, as you know, Ukraine has announced a structured default plan. In other words, they're going to default on all the money they owe Russia for oil, gas, for everything. Just going to say, if we owe it to Russia, written off, not going to pay it. And Putin is valid coming back and saying that Kiev doesn't seem to understand. It doesn't matter who Kiev defaults to. If once they default, no more money comes into them from the IMF and the World Bank and the ECB under the current rules. They'll have to change the rules. But Russia is saying that if Kiev just arbitrarily says, we're not giving you back any of the money that we owe you, that Russia's going to have to take a tough position. From which, I mean, they're going to shut off those gas valves going into Ukraine. Just shut them down solid. Because Ukraine cannot survive without Russian gas, and Europe doesn't have enough to send back to them. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over at the United Nations, the Security Council had this resolution they put forward regarding firearms and light weapons. The resolution has passed, but some of the countries abstained from voting. Russia, China, Angola, Venezuela, Nigeria, and Chad all abstained because they had wanted amendments to the resolution to prevent handover of weapons and ammunition to unauthorized non-governmental entities, meaning covert action paramilitary groups. And this resolution left that loophole wide open. Because that's how these little color revolution coup d'etats get put together. The Pentagon is now announcing that the next step in the confrontation with China will be to deploy U.S. warships and warplanes near these Chinese islands in the South China Sea. And again, it's brinksmanship on a grand scale. I don't think the U.S. wants a real shooting war with China. What they want is a state of conflict, hostility, or Cold War through which they can coerce all of America's allies around the world not to start using the yuan for global trade and banking. That's what all these wars are all about. Keeping the dollar in charge of the global economy, even though the dollar is in serious, serious trouble. That's why people are turning away from it. It's not trustworthy anymore. QE is inflating its value away. The world is now aware that the U.S. doesn't actually have the wealth it claims to have. They're very upset over the vanishing of their gold bullion from the New York Federal Reserve and the Bank of England and the Bank of France. Let's be fair about that. And the world wants to basically stop using a banking system which now, by its own admission, is criminal. There's an amazing recidivism rate in these banks. They'll get caught, they'll pay a fine, and promise they won't do it again. Then they get caught again, blame some low-level flunky and say, we're sorry, we won't do it again. Pay a small fine. Then they get caught again, pay the fine. Get caught again, pay the fine. There ought to be a 3 strikes law for banks. Third time you get caught in fraud, we don't care who did it, your company gets shut down. If corporations are persons, under the Citizens United decision, there needs to be the equivalent of a corporate death penalty for repeat offenders. Now, over in Greece, they're starting to talk about bringing in a parallel currency, bringing back the drachma supposedly in parallel because the euro-based segment of their economy is just locking up. And Greece is starting to talk about issuing some kind of a currency that's an IOU for their public pensions and salaries because they're out of cash. Well, Los Angeles actually tried to do that during their last fiscal crisis. And it didn't work because banks wouldn't accept those government-issued IOUs as having any value for a deposit. They're thrashing around, trying to find some way to keep what's going to happen from happening, and they can't really. Everything they're doing is basically fraud and illusion and trying to make it look like it's good, because nobody has the courage to stand up and point the finger of blame at the real cause of all of these problems. Private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest create more debt than money with which to pay that debt until the accumulated debt destroys the system. Once you are sold into the slavery of a private central bank, you cannot get out as long as you play by their rules. It's mathematically impossible to repay the debt owed a private central bank because there isn't enough money in existence. The U.S. government could come in, take our homes, our cars, all of our property, everything. Leave 300 million Americans standing naked and hungry in the streets of America, give all of what's left to the Federal Reserve, and there'd still be a huge debt left over, unpaid. It's designed that way. And everybody in government who supported this system and sold us into its slavery knew it was going to be like this. But for enough money, they were willing to sell the people of the United States of America back into the same system of predatory banking enslavement we fought a revolution to break free of. And they did it because they knew when it started coming apart, it was going to be long after they're dead. They went to their graves happy after lifetimes of wealth and privilege and luxury and power. When it destroys the nation and destroys the people of the country, it's not my problem. It's going to be somebody else's problem to deal with. They've been kicking that can down the road for 100 years now. It doesn't even look like a can anymore. It looks like a beat-up gum wrapper. Now, apparently, the SEC commissioner, in the aftermath of yesterday's settlement by the world's biggest banks, who have admitted they criminally rigged virtually all the markets since the great financial crisis and probably long before that. And the SEC commissioner came out and said, basically, it is a recidivist criminal behavior going on. They keep doing it because nothing really bad happens to them. None of the bankers have gone to jail. They may sacrifice some low-level functionary if somebody has to go to jail for political reasons. They write the fines off their taxes and dump the rest of the losses on their customers and investors. They start sitting down and saying, all right, what's the next one we're going to do? Story out of governmentslaves.info. Department of Justice declines prosecuting Wall Street bankers for the 2008 crash. They got off scot-free. Who paid for the 2008 crash? You did. With TARP, bailouts, quantitative easing. You paid the price of their criminal behavior, and they all walked off scot-free courtesy of the United States Department of Justice. I'm sorry, I mispronounced that. It's the United States Department of Just Us. Article over in RIMP.com. Why aren't the bankers in prison who commit these frauds? We need to do what Iceland did when that whole 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud imploded. Iceland threw their crooked bankers in prison. They wrote off all the debt on the people created through fraud. Iceland's economy took off. That's why you don't hear about Iceland anymore. It sets a bad example for you banker slaves. They don't want you to know there are other ways to run a nation's economy that work better for the nation and the people. You're not supposed to know about that. Not even the banking system this nation itself was started with. Article out of Government Slaves again. For many American states, it's like the recession never ended. And with all the fudging of numbers, it may be that it never did. For large swaths of the country, now they're hemming and hawing and saying that, yeah, those first quarter numbers for 2015 may have been negative after all. We keep seeing this time and time again. from the financial media, financial centers, and even the government. Oh, the numbers are good. The economy's great. The numbers are good. And then 3-6 months down the road, well, we've had to go back and correct and revise them downward. And yeah, it was pretty bad back then. But it's better today. Trust us. The other day we were talking about this study that was ranking wealth inequality around the world, and how it came out that there were two nations that were way, way above the rest of the world by a huge margin, Israel and the United States. And today we got a clarification. The United States is at the top of that list. The United States has the greatest problem of wealth inequality among all the developed nations. And again, I don't have a problem with people who want to be rich. But there's a right way and there's a wrong way. People like Steve Jobs, James Cameron, George Lucas, people who make products that we want to buy and voluntarily trade our money for, they get rich. And that's what capitalism is supposed to be. And we are right to honor and admire and wish to emulate people like that. But our economy has been destroyed by the Bernie Madoffs and the Jamie Dimons, who don't produce anything of any use or value. They merely game and rig the system to loot as much wealth from it as they can. We got to take a break for news, and we'll be back with Hour 2 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And I guess it's a quiet day. People are already heading out early for their Memorial Day festivities and shopping and the rest of them. That's okay. That's what the holidays are for here. Alrighty, getting on back to the news here. Apple Watch was very proud to announce amazing sales when it was finally released. There was a huge ad campaign just promoting this thing. The new versions of iOS on the phone already have the built-in interface to the watch, and by the way, you can't even delete that. Just constantly pushing that watch. And they had spectacular sales for the first couple of days. And after that, it just fell off. It's been flat ever since. And this may be Apple's new incarnation of Lisa, which you probably won't even recognize unless you're a hardcore computer aficionado, like yours truly. Lisa was the predecessor to the Macintosh. And it did not do very well at all. Companies do make goofs. I think the problem with the Apple Watch is it's just a remote screen for your phone. And I don't think that's enough for people to want to spend the kind of money to get that. Somebody's actually now got what they're calling the Apple Ring. It's not from Apple. But it works with the iPhone and the iWatch, and it's a ring with a little tiny screen that sends messages to you. That's a little overboard, I think. Just a little overboard, a teensy bit. I love my Casio, which my wife gave me. It's got an altimeter and a barometer and a compass and all this other stuff, and it listens to the radio signals to set the time, and it's very cool. And it's solar-powered. Should last longer than I will. Over in London, another embarrassment for the U.S. State Department. An embassy worker, State Department employee, has been arrested on charges of scamming and blackmailing hundreds of women from his computer at the U.S. Embassy in London. They're saying it's a sextortion case where he would somehow coerce them into sending him naked pictures of themselves. Hundreds of women. Boy, it's got to be a great job working for the U.S. government. Do this kind of stuff. All right, let's get a little more serious here. We're going to talk a little bit about Hillary's emails. And Hillary's campaign is making a big deal about the fact that the State Department has started releasing her emails. Huzzah, 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 huzzah. Well, already we're finding out the emails being released by the State Department are being sanitized. They're having to admit that at least one email was held back, supposedly at the request of the FBI. And Hillary is out there saying, well, even though we're not releasing all the emails and things are being held back, the information is being handled appropriately. It's in compliance with the laws and the regulations, which is a lawyer's argument, but I don't think it's going to wash with the American public. All they see is cover-up, concealment, deception. Politics is perception. Nobody's going to go into that voting booth next year and say, well, legally Hillary was in the right there to not really be forthcoming with the emails from her private server. What they're going to say is private server, compromised security, questions about whether the American people really know what the State Department was doing at all. Because we're at a stage in our history where the U.S. government has lost the presumption of truth on their side. All through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even the 90s. Even through most of the aughts, the attitude of the U.S. government is, we will tell you what the truth is. The burden of proof is on those who say we are lying to prove that we are lying. And, of course, people who had the proof that the government was lying were attacked, smeared, sometimes killed. But that shifted. Right now, the majority of the American people, polls continue to show, the majority of the American people do not trust the U.S. government or the corporate media. The burden of proof has shifted onto them. They cannot get by with assertions and pronouncements and declarations. Hillary is out there saying that all this information is being handled appropriately, and the American people are going to say, okay, prove it. Prove it to us. So, anyway. Now, apparently, more emails have surfaced confirming that Clinton was told that the Benghazi attack was planned by a group of fighters supposedly tied to Al-Qaeda. That there was no basis for this claim that it was in response to this Innocence of Muslims movie, which didn't actually exist. All it was a trailer hacked together out of another movie and overdubbed. It was a rush job, and it really did show it, too. And with a government that wags terror attacks at us constantly to support the war on terror, to keep us afraid, to keep us supporting the war agenda, the only reason to cover up a terror attack at Benghazi is if it was a false flag terror attack that went horribly, horribly wrong. Another story out of 12160. Second email address raises questions about Hillary Clinton's transparency, her relationship with Blumenthal, which is proving to be hugely embarrassing now to ABC, which paid him $105 million to come on over and be one of their talking heads. Wow, being a paid liar for the corporate media sure pays really well. Getting another story from NWO Patriot Link News, more confirmation that, yes, Hillary Clinton was receiving sensitive, classified information on her unsecured personal email server. When this private email server issue first surfaced, before it was taken down and the hard drives formatted to erase all the evidence, security experts looking at the server said it was wide open. It wasn't secure. Certainly not against a foreign government that wanted to get in there. I mean, Petraeus got slapped around for sharing a few things with his mistress. Mishandling of classified documents was the official charge. Hillary's done exactly the same thing, orders of magnitude worse. Now, over at the Congress, Trey Gowdy is already accusing the State Department of holding back key documents, key pieces of information. The State Department's attitude is, look, we're giving you emails, and Gowdy is saying, you're giving me the junk. And now we know what is being handed out by the State Department is being filtered and sanitized. So they're going through the motions. They're trying to make it look like Hillary is playing by the rules to cover up for the fact that she wasn't playing by the rules, still trying to get her positioned as the presumed Democratic nominee going into 2016. And I got to tell you right now, Bernie Sanders is looking better and better every day that goes by. Story out of RINF.com. The CIA is now trying to create a connection between the guy that was killed in Abbottabad, which they're saying was Osama bin Laden, and conspiracy theorists. Because in the document dump that they did, they included lists of websites supposedly visited by this guy they're telling us was bin Laden, and a list of books written by conspiracy theorists here in the United States of America that supposedly Osama bin Laden was reading in between all of his pornographic magazines, books, and videotapes. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. The phone lines are starting to load up here, and before I take the first call, quick little story. The FBI is now admitting that they never cracked a single major case using the snooping powers given to them by the Patriot Act. Not one. The cases they solved were done with regular, old-fashioned, compliant with the Bill of Rights police work. The Patriot Act snooping is not only unconstitutional, it's not only illegal, it's not only expensive, it's a total waste of resources in terms of fighting real criminals and real terrorists. Which underscores the fact that all of this snooping is not about crime and terror. It's about keeping watch on law-abiding American citizens to make sure they're not thinking those double plus ungood thoughts. That's what's going on. That's what it's really all about. The government is afraid of you. The government is terrified that you are starting to think for yourself. You're starting to ask questions and then come up with your own answers. And they can't handle that. They can't rule you if you're actually thinking for yourself. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Damien in New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how you doing? I'm really starting to think we need a complete shift as far as the laws and how they're enforced and who they're enforced on. Seems like it's sort of the opposite of what it should be. It should be doubly enforced on law enforcement, people in the government, this kind of thing, and it's not our job really to necessarily trust these people.
Those were the founding principles.
We're supposed to really hold them skeptical based on history, is what I'm saying, not the founding principles. The founding principles have fallen by the wayside, but historically, in my lifetime, I'm 43 years old. I've never trusted anybody that's held the presidency of the United States in my lifetime, and historically, looking back, we can see that there are many people that we can say they try to do the right thing, but the powers behind them were doing otherwise. And this in our time, well, in my time period, though that side has completely taken over any and all aspect of anybody who wants to try to do something on the side of right.
Well, that's certainly behind the John F. Kennedy assassination, and to a lesser extent, the murder of Vince Foster. There are people who got into the White House, and all of a sudden they said, wow, this isn't a game anymore. I'm in the White House, and I've got a job I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm going to try and do it right. And I think that is ultimately what led to both of their deaths, and probably some other people as well. Because you're right. The problem is not the president or the vice president or any individuals. It is a systemic issue. Once a government goes corrupt, it goes all the way corrupt. And the way the nation was set up was to not have a central powerful government that would be seen as a prize worthy of conquest by corrupting influences. And that system really did work for the nation and its people. But even Thomas Jefferson, in his own writings, predicted that the new revolutionary government he'd invented was only going to last about 100 years before the corrupting influences got it to a situation where there would have to be another revolution and another restart. Jefferson had no illusions that the government he created was ever going to last.
Right. Yeah. Just wanted to see, you were talking about, well, first of all, Hillary. It's again, we feel, I think we really need a shift as far as if any candidates that are getting huge amounts of money, it doesn't even matter where they're coming from to some degree because we know where they're coming from. But it seems like the candidate with the most money should be the candidate that we, first of all, we start to immediately see with immediate, total skepticism, and the candidates that we see that are not getting as much money, we start to look at it a little bit more seriously. Now, I know you mentioned Bernie Sanders. I'm a big supporter of him. I lived in Vermont, and one of the main reasons, first of all, he's the only one talking about breaking up the banks and serious about it. He's been on that for years. He was on Greenspan for a long time. Also, he's the only one, to my knowledge, that voted against Iraq. And a lot of people have said things about his other stances and this and that, but bottom line is he has his record is very impressive. The things that he's the decisions and what he's stuck to. He's been very strong on those things.
Well,
one person.
Hang on, I need to cut in here, and I'm going to have to let you go because we've got a bunch of calls here. I know that the Democratic Party leadership is very concerned. The firestorm around Hillary is not dying down, and we've still got almost a year and a half before the election. And how they're going to hold off all of this stuff, knowing that as they, once they commit to Hillary at the convention, everybody's going to uncork on her about Vince Foster, about Travelgate, cattle futures trades, Iran-Contra, the links to drug running. All of that is going to come out. I'm starting to hear rumblings about the Democratic National Committee attempting to draft Joe Biden to step into the ring as their emergency fallback position in case of a Hillary flameout.
Well, Mike, I'll let you go. I don't want to hold up the line. Happy Memorial Day, and best to Claire.
All right, thank you very much. Same to you. And we're going to switch over to Eric in Nebraska. Aloha, Eric. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Recently, a couple of interviews with Dane Wigington brought up that Japan was supposedly blackmailed to shut down their national bank. If they didn't, they would have got hit with an earthquake. You were talking about earthquakes yesterday in the Ring of Fire. This Dane Wigington guy sounds like he's kind of a chemtrail shill.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm not paying too much attention to it. It's possible to start earthquakes with fracking injection. In fact, they just had a magnitude 5 in Nevada earlier today, south of Las Vegas. But I've heard people out there trying to say that the quake and tsunami that led to Fukushima was artificially created. The seismographic record shows that the rupture occurred way too deep in the Earth's crust for anybody to have gotten down there. And I know a lot of people said, well, it wasn't really an earthquake, it was a nuclear bomb. I don't think you understand how much energy is released in a major quake. It makes a nuclear bomb look like a kitchen match in comparison. Even the Russians' Tsar Bomba, if it was buried deep in the earth and set off, it would generate maybe a magnitude 3.5 quake. The difference in the difference in energy levels is just amazing.
The reason I called it came up on a podcast that I really like. It's Ellen Brown's podcast, and it seems like a lot of people are brought into this, hoax, and it's kind of concerning.
Okay.
To the Rangers, just go down to Monsanto and do your little march this weekend. All you gotta do is just go out and go for a little walk. Good exercise. You got plenty of time this weekend.
Yeah, that's taking place tomorrow.
Yeah, it'll be. I think it's going to be pretty big. And
I hope so.
Yeah,
thank you very much. And anybody who's going to those Monsanto marches, please take lots of pictures and send them to me, and we will be posting them up at the website. We have to take another break for commercials. I know we've got another caller waiting on the line. I'm going to get to your phone call as soon as we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go right to the phones and talk to Chris in Michigan, I think it is. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. How are you today?
I'm doing good.
Well, I just had a little thought for all the global warmers out there who believe that because they're breathing out, it's getting warmer. I got a tip for them. Stop breathing out. Just stop breathing out. And after a while, they'll die off, and we can go ahead and breathe out again. And enjoy what we've been doing for thousands of years.
Well, the global warming people are having a really lousy time right now. I mean, Obama is out there saying climate change is a national security threat. The military will respond. And the instant he said that, the first thing that came to mind was Caligula, the Roman emperor, who declared war on the ocean and ordered his army to stab the water with their spears. So we are really in trouble. We've got a new Caligula in Washington, D.C. Joe Biden is out there talking to the Navy saying that, you know, we've got to be the global force for climate control, whatever. Meanwhile, of course, they got 7 inches of snow in Flagstaff, Arizona this morning. And they're already looking at freeze warnings for the Northeast for the Memorial Day weekend. Freeze warnings for Erie, New York underway right now. Looking at snow in the forecast tonight for New Brunswick. Snow in Colorado over the Memorial Day weekend. Colorado's happy. All their ski resorts are staying open. But you know, when you go back and you look at 2000 and all the carbon Nazis were saying because of human-caused global warming, snow and ice are now a thing of the past. And they're still out there pushing this thing because Obama needs his carbon tax to keep the government ticking along until somebody else is in the Oval Office to take the blame for the implosion. And the best thing we can do is deny that to him. No more money. Giving this government any more money is like giving a bottle of scotch and the keys to the family cars to a bunch of teenage boys. That's how dangerous it is right now.
Yeah, I seen Obama up there on TV today. He had a yarmulke on and said, I was wondering, is this our president? Whose president is this?
Well, it's Israel's president of the United States, and they all have been.
I forgot, we're Eastern Israel.
Yeah.
Either way. Yeah, stop breathing out, carbon warmers. And you have a nice day, Mike. Enjoy your weekend.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Yeah, I always have the same thing when I hear all these people screaming about, the world is overpopulated. There's really way too many people. And I say, okay, there's a tall building right there. Do your part to solve the problem. Just take the elevator up there, say a couple of Hail Marys, and do a swan dive. Hit a banker on the way down. Do some good there. All right, we're going to talk to Don in California. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. How are you, buddy?
Doing fine. That's fine.
Good. It's, I just want to say, I haven't been a very long time listener, but for a few months, you've, opened my eyes in ways that I couldn't even express on the air or anywhere else. So I want to say thank you for that. What I wanted to talk about today, I guess, kind of, you can hang up after after my, question, but I don't want to see it, but it looks like the next war might be us versus our own government to try to get it back, because it's not ours right now, is it?
No, it isn't. It belongs to Israel, belongs to the corporations, belongs to the money junkies. However, that being said, I certainly do not encourage or support armed insurrection by the American people for the practical reason the U.S. government's ready for that. They've been setting up agencies to protect continuity of government. They've got underground bunkers. They got tanks and pain-raising gas and everything like that. And in the end, we don't need to. What we need to do is step back, not give the government an excuse to declare a national emergency and martial law, and just let it finish destroying itself, which it's in the process of doing. Think back to the end of the Soviet Union. There was no armed revolution against the Central Soviet government. The Soviet government simply collapsed from debt, from corruption, from the Russian people realizing that government was doing nothing but lying to them all the time, and it simply imploded on itself. And they had to get through about 3-4 months of hardship. We're going to have to do the same, and we're going to have to be taking care of each other, our friends and neighbors and family, to get through that while a new republic is formed that will be much better for life in this country, just as the Russian republics are much better for life for the Russian people following the Soviet Union. I really think that's what's in the process of happening right now, and I don't condone or encourage initiating violence against the government. On the other hand, prudence demands that you be prepared for when the government initiates violence against you. And by the way, apparently the start of Jade Helm 15, the official start, has been moved up into June. Frankly, it seems like it's already underway. We're seeing all these reports about military all over the roads and everything. But for some reason, they've decided to have the official start of Jade Helm move up a little bit.
Okay, because I also do not condone attacking any government at all or police officers, because they are people, and like you said, they are our friends. You know, they aren't all bad, and we don't have the weaponry that they have. They are waiting for that. So, yeah, exactly. Again, I absolutely am not on that side for that. But on another note, when are you going to announce your run for presidency?
At the start of next year. And it is a joke campaign, but there's already a website for it, Rivero2016.com, and we've got buttons and T-shirts, and but in the coming months I need to fill out the website in terms of my political philosophy, because while the campaign itself is humorous, I'm using it as a platform to put out a lot of what I think is wrong with this country and how it could be fixed. A lot of it is material that's being taken from this perpetually in progress book, The Blueprint for the New America. But I'm going to officially really ramp it up on January 1st of next year.
Well, the world could learn a whole lot from you, and I can only imagine. You know, we can have our little dreams over the weekend of what it would be like as Mr. Rivero as president.
Well,
I just start thinking about it.
I can't really run for president. I won't sell my soul to Israel. I won't sell my soul to Wall Street. I won't lie to the American people. I did inhale both times, and I really liked it. Okay, so I'm unsuitable to be president of the United States of America.
Well, Mike, you are absolutely fantastic. Thank you again for sacrificing all you have to put the truth out and let everyone know. Like I said, you've opened my eyes. And I'm trying to spread it to as many people as I can as well.
Well, that is the best thing that you can do, and I thank you for standing up and having the courage to speak out, because by doing so, you're going to give everyone around you the courage to speak out as well. Thank you for those very kind words. I appreciate them.
You're very welcome, Michael. Enjoy your weekend.
I certainly will. Same to you. All righty. Now then, as long as we got on to human-caused global warming, Dr. Philip Lloyd, he's a South Africa-based physicist and a climate researcher. And at one point, he was the lead author at the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, writing up all these reports saying the world is warming, it's all the fault of humans, we, the United Nations, have to impose a global environmental authority to tell people how they must live their lives. Get rid of your air conditioning, and get rid of your large TV, and, burn cow flaps to cook your food on, or something like that. Well, he's now gone back to his own life, and he has now put out a new paper where he's saying basically the temperature swings that we have been seeing fall well within the limits of natural variance of climate here on Earth. And he's saying that while there's probably some kind of an influence by greenhouse gases, the major portion of temperature fluctuations, that's just natural stuff. And by the way, when they talk about greenhouse gases warming the planet, they're talking about all the greenhouse gases, which includes water vapor, which is the most powerful and abundant. But they can't get you to pay a cloud tax, so they didn't talk about water vapor. Then there's methane, which is 10 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. But most methane comes from deep crust microbes and bacteria that are too smart to listen to Al Gore and his nonsense. And that's why they picked on carbon dioxide, because they can blame that on you to guilt you out of your money and obedience. We have to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we take this next phone call, I want to skip on back up to we were talking about all this spying that's going on. The FBI now admitting that all of the Patriot Act surveillance that they have done on the American people did not lead to any major crime being solved. Because real criminals and real terrorists can secure their communications. That was the point we made with our 6 NSA encryption challenges that we put out from this website. And I'm not a cryptographic expert. And I'm only a moderately decent programmer. And if I can defeat the NSA, so can anybody who feels that they need to. And I'm looking at this article over an Investment Watch blog where the political consensus that says a high level of surveillance on all Americans is necessary is beginning to crumble around the edges. And we're seeing the lines form among members of Congress, for one example. And I think probably members of Congress break down into one of two groups. The first group are those members of Congress who realize they themselves are being spied on, and they're not happy with it. And they're the ones who are saying maybe it's time to tone this down, pull it back, go back to that Fourth Amendment. Then there's the other group of people in Congress that the NSA was spying on and found blackmail information. And they're the ones up there saying, no, the NSA is good, the NSA is great, we've got to let them keep on going and spying on everybody, because otherwise their own dark secrets will hit the media. Recordings of their late-night phone calls with Fifi's phone fantasies. We're, speaking of phones, going to go to the phone. Casey in South Korea. Aloha, Casey. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Annyeonghaseyo, Mike. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Taxes are on my mind. Last week there was some article I saw about states increasing taxes because of shortfalls, and this person, somebody made a brilliant comment. Just listed all of the taxes that we pay, both state and federal. 97. I'm sure there's more, but so yeah, taxes are on my mind, and I wanted to do a quick point on Obamacare tax and carbon tax. But two of the taxes on the list, one was a flush tax that some states have, I guess, and another a tanning tax under Obamacare. I don't know if you heard about those two.
Yes, I have. See, the reason they have all these different taxes is to conceal from the American people just how much government is taking from us all. A lot of those taxes are actually hidden. They're taxes on products that we buy, like gasoline taxes and tire taxes, where we don't actually see them as taxes. It's simply part of the purchase price. But if you total all of that up, you will see that government makes more money off of our labor than we do, and we're in a situation of half of our lives are spent just working to give wealth to the ruling class, and they graciously allow us to have the other half for ourselves. And that same ratio, 50-50, working for yourself, to take care of yourself, working for the masters, is the exact same ratio under which the Roman slaves lived, the medieval serfs lived, the antebellum blacks in the American South lived. I don't care what label you put on it. We are at the same ratio of work for ourselves, work for the masters, as those previous slave cultures.
And that hidden tax point is exactly what I want. The carbon tax and Obamacare tax I want to mention. The carbon tax, one of the first taxes is airport transportation. And if anybody flies, I really recommend they look at the breakdown of what they're getting charged for. Besides the brown shirts, the TSA, I know Europe bundles carbon tax into the airline fees. Do you know if the U.S. is bundling that in or wants to? I mean, there's all these taxes when you take a flight, but
I do not know because I haven't actually been on a commercial airplane since last November, and I didn't take a good look at the actual bill, and I probably should have. But, yeah, the reason there are all these different taxes and fees is simply to hide from the American people just how much of their money is being taken by the government to give to Israel, to give to Wall Street, to buy weapons that don't really work. And it really is a bit of a scam. And part of the blueprint for the new America is there's only going to be one tax that everybody sees and everybody pays, and you know what it's going to. And there are not going to be all these other little, hidden gotchas to nickel and dime you to death.
And by the, I'm calling from out of Asia. And by the way, the airlines in China tend to be a couple $100 cheaper. And the reason why they don't do like the Europe airlines do the carbon tax, and China doesn't. So that's why their tickets tend to be cheaper. The other quick last point is just the Obamacare. And my thinking last year was people were going to get really angry this summer when they see that they get their income tax check back, and they're like, hey, why is this taken out if they don't have compliant Obamacare? Are they taking it out this year? Or are they kind of saying, oh, we're going to wait till next year? Is the IRS doing the penalties?
Yeah, they started the penalties. This year they're very low. Next year they double. And to add insult to injury, the affordable insurance rates for those Obamacare compliant policies are going to increase by 50%. And it's a classic pattern. Order everybody to use this category of product and then raise the price on that product to loot more money from them. It's exactly the same thing when the American colonies were forced to do business only with the British East India Company, which sold really cheap, shoddy products to the colonies and charged huge fees for them and just made a huge amount of money off of it.
Yeah, I just saw the headline yesterday. It was the premiums are going to go up. I mean, it's just in the news, so there you go. Obamacare, lovely. Yeehaw. Now, I mean, I don't have to do it because I'm a resident of another country. So, yeah, thankfully I don't. But, okay, well, thanks, Mike. Have a great weekend, and keep it up.
All right, thank you very much. I will. Now then, as we head to the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire here just wrapping up on this whole privacy issue, there is a warning coming out of newsforge.com, and it's one that I issued myself earlier in the week. This so-called USA Freedom Act is being promoted as somehow prohibiting the NSA's mass surveillance practices. It doesn't. It simply changes who's in charge of it. So they can say the NSA isn't spying on you anymore. Yeah, but the private telecoms are being ordered to pick up the slack. It's basically a clandestine extension of the Patriot Act abuses for years, and in fact opens up even more invasive forms of government spying on you all. They're scared of you. They're worried that you are awake. You've taken the red pill, whatever metaphor you want to use. You're thinking for yourself. You're asking questions. You dare to doubt the official story. And that's why they're afraid of you. And that's why they got to spy on all of us. They're not spying on criminals. They're not catching the guys running around the shopping malls, stealing your credit card information by radio. They're not interested in the cyber criminals. They're interested in watching all of you to make sure you're not thinking those double plus ungood thoughts. That's the reason for it. Same function the Gestapo had in Nazi Germany, making sure the people stayed where they were supposed to be, didn't dare stand up and say, I think you're leading this country in a bad direction. That's what all this spying is about, and that's why they don't want it to go away. And we're still getting that old thing, well, why do you care if you have nothing to hide, okay? Well, that's like saying, why do you care about free speech if you don't have anything to say? It's there to be used when you need it. That's really what's going on. And by the way, I love this activist group. They planted hidden tape recorders all over New York City to catch people's conversations. They're making them public to illustrate the idea that even though these people weren't committing crimes, yeah, they're going to be angry that their private conversations were being shared with a third party. Both the ACLU and the Tea Party are out there saying the government has gone way too far in this spying. They're absolutely right about that. Little bit of a victory. Federal judge in Washington has said that laptops and electronic devices are not handbags and cannot be searched at the border without a warrant. So there's a little bit of a legislative pushback here. And finally, BBC, for all the bad that they've done, they came out with a documentary that's acknowledging what's going on here. And the documentary is How Hackers Changed the World. And they're basically saying how all the independent media and the bloggers and all these little individuals operating together in concert have managed to thwart government tyranny, delay the world war, and in many cases force positive political change. Got to take a break for the news. We'll be back with the Lady Claire after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show today. And for those of you watching on BAM User TV, the gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire.
Aloha.
Who deigns to join us from time to time and share her particular perspective on the world. And what did you want to talk about first?
Well, I wanted to bring forward an article I found at a website that is very perceptive. And I'm going to have to change the name. When the Excrement Hits the Ventilation Plan. And the article by Brandon Smith is martial law justified if ISIS attacks in the U.S.? And he's coming to the conclusion that Jade Helm is definitely not meant to prepare troops for foreign operations. The program is admitted to be a primer for military response to quote-unquote crisis scenarios denoting domestic operation. Special forces are training with domestic agencies like FBI and DEA, and they are training and infiltrating completely American environments, which they would not be doing unless they plan to operate in very similar environments. Special forces always train like they fight.
Well, I think there's an area of concern there because, as we were mentioning earlier on the show, we know the United States government has been trying to gin up race riots of some kind, or some kind of a controllable uprising where they can say, oh, it's a national emergency, martial law, no more Constitution, and the American people aren't biting because we understand that's what they want. So obviously, if they're out here pushing this idea that an attack by ISIS would justify a national emergency and martial law, then all the government has to do is get one of their hired actors to come in and say, I'm ISIS, and poof, there's a mushroom cloud, and Obama gets to be president for life.
One of the things that he mentions, the coming together, and he says this is no accident, of the timing of these ISIS warnings, the reignition of economic downturn in 2014-2015, the global shift away from the dollar and Jade Helm are not entirely accidental. Martial law is not a scenario that can be generated in a vacuum. It needs a primer, a trigger, if not multiple trigger events.
Well, triggering martial law and a national emergency is one thing, but getting the American people to go along with it, that is something else. Because the only way a national emergency and martial law is going to work is if the American people are convinced it's necessary, it's just, and so forth. And right now, the American people are so distrustful of the government and the corporate media. I mean, the polls are at record lows in terms of the American people's opinion of the government. The government can say it's a national emergency, and the American people are going to stand up and say, no, it isn't. This is you and another, power grab, and we're not going to go along with it. We don't recognize there is a need for the suspension of our civil rights.
And I like the way he ends this article. He mentions that debate over JH-15 and programs like it will change. It will become a matter of the greater good against a foreign enemy rather than a government overstepping against the rights of the people. How can we possibly question the defense of American soil against terrorists? Isn't it an undeniable directive of the military? And if we do question such a directive and its value to the American people, are we not weakening the resolve and effectiveness of the defense apparatus through negative public opinion? And by extension, would that not make us, quote unquote, domestic enemies as well? And he has been very thoughtful about how he thinks that
is exactly how the government will pitch it.
Yeah.
Trust us. ISIS came in to kill all of your kittens, and anybody who says otherwise. Well, I mean, you've got Obama out there saying that anybody who doesn't believe that was Osama bin Laden at Abbottabad is a conspiracy theorist. They're trying to revive that as a pejorative. Obama's out there saying they're going to use the military to deal with global warming. We're into Caligula territory here.
Yeah, a lot of hubris and narcissism. I'd like to bop over to Israel right now.
Okay. Good luck getting through Ben Gurion Airport.
Well, not just figuratively, not literally.
Okay.
No, that is not a place that I think I could go and not be risking my life at this point. A few days ago, on May 14th, Ms. Ayelet Shaked, who has no training in law, took the office as the new Minister of Justice in Israel, appointed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Among other things, this ministry's responsibility include legal advice, legislation, the Office of State Attorney Generals, civilian legal aid, and public defender. The Minister of Justice is considered having much discretionary authority, especially unlike most nations. Israel has no written constitution. Apparently, the Orthodox community there wanted it to be all Torah, so instead there is no constitution at all. And on the 1st of July of last year, Ms. Shaked posted an article to Facebook with the following in it, arguing why all Palestinians, including those who live in Israel, are members of the Palestinian people, and the Palestinian people are enemies of the Israeli state and therefore must be destroyed. What she is talking about, folks, is genocide.
That's exactly what she's talking about.
Sponsored genocide.
And we're hearing this from many of the members of this new ultra-right-wing government that Netanyahu has pulled together.
Yeah.
They're out there saying, the land is all ours, God gave it to us, and actually calling for world support to cleanse the West Bank and Gaza of the Palestinians. I don't think they're going to get a lot of traction with that one.
I hope not. She is a very interesting choice on the part of Netanyahu and is a terrifying window on his mindset.
Absolutely.
The next thing I wanted to talk about was an article posted in Anti-War, another blog with which we have a great deal of resonance. And it's by Pat Buchanan, who sometimes let's say I have a hug and a punch relationship with his work. Sometimes it's right on and other times it's pat. Come on now. And the question he asks at the end of the article, considering the millions of dead, wounded, uprooted, homeless, sick, and suffering American-born and native-born, have our wars and bombings in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen been, on balance, more of a blessing than a curse to the people we went to help? No, Pat. We didn't go there to help them.
No, we didn't. We went to steal their oil and make sure it was sold only for dollars. We went in there to put in puppet regime. We don't invade countries to help the people there.
No.
And for Pat to even see
go
that.
There.
Okay, Pat.
Man. And one final thing that Pat Buchanan neglected to mention in this article. Anyone remember Muqtada al-Sadr? Hands up if you do. The Iranian cleric who stated that if U.S. troops stayed one day beyond the agreement of the SOFA with the Iraqi government, that they would be considered fair game for his Mahdi army. Well, now we didn't see this in the corporate press at all, but as reported in the longmorejournal.org on 3 May, about 19 days ago, radical cleric Muqtada al-Sadr threatened to attack U.S. personnel inside Iraq and beyond if the U.S. House of Representatives passes a bill that would have recognized Kurdistan and Sunni in western Iraq as their own independent country. Sadr, whose Iranian-backed militia battled U.S. and coalition troops in Baghdad and central and southern Iraq, released a statement on his website on April 29, calling for a tax on U.S. interests if Congress passes the National Authorization Act for 2016. Now, I would strongly urge that going back into any of these countries would be a very double plus ungood thing for the U.S. government to do. But as we know, just because something is the most pig-headedly, ham-fistedly stupid thing this government can do is no guarantee that they're not going to rush in there and do it. And Americans...
And even afterwards, there'll just be the endless argument, this was a total mistake. No, it wasn't. We did the right thing, maybe for the wrong reasons, but we're always right. Bill Kristol, a good example. He's out there saying, the Iraq War was definitely a success. By what measure?
Yeah. And the American people are war-weary, they are war-skeptical, and at this point, generally don't believe a darn thing coming out of D.C. because of all of the lies and all of the deceit and all of the paid-for legislation and legislators.
We are sadder but wiser. We must take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And, Claire, what is your next topic?
Well, again, from antiwar.com, very to-the-point article, and it says, it's titled, The World's Next Ukraine. And while the world's attention is focused on the Middle East, as usual, where ISIS, the creation of Washington, Saudi, and Gulf allies, is the focus of alleged terrorist threat, a potentially more dangerous crisis is being ramped up by our professional regime changers in the volatile Balkans. The Russian-Turkish plan to pipe Russian oil through Turkey and then on to Macedonia and thence into southern Europe has long been opposed by the West, which is seeking to block the Russians at every turn. Now the Western powers have found an effective way to stop it by overthrowing the pro-Russian government of Macedonian Prime Minister Nikola Gruevski. And, I am having one of these. I am having a palm-to-forehead moment at velocity reading this. Because look
how badly they botched up Kiev, and here they are doing exactly the same thing in Macedonia. And we already know it's a U.S. put-up job. The unrest in Macedonia has already been linked to George Soros funding these various NGOs. They actually had a contest for Macedonian students. They were paying the Macedonian students $1,500 each to come up with ideas on how to bring about regime change in their own country. And the students thought it was an academic exercise.
Oh, wow. And it appears, and it has for the last couple of administrations, that the most crucial criteria for working for the U.S. government are absolute pathological inabilities to either learn from one's mistakes or think a scenario all the way through. Everything that we have done with this regime change in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Ukraine, and Libya, epic fail, folks. absolute epic fail.
Our government can never admit error or wrongdoing or change course because they survive on the image of governmental infallibility. And we've seen that with Obamacare. We've seen it with human-caused global warming. We're seeing it with all of these war agendas. And our government is filled with a bunch of people who are delusional, and maybe they're driven that way by all the prescription antidepressants that they're on. But they always seem to have this idea about, well, yeah, this messed up the last time, but we can do better because we're superior people to our predecessors, and that, of course, is not always necessarily true. But, yeah, Kiev has just turned into a major political debacle. The U.S. is having to literally back out of there now. Poroshenko's trying to start a war all on his own. But still, the machinery moves forward into Macedonia. And this is going to end with full, outright, conventional war breaking out across the globe. The U.S. is not in a position to prevail, and that means it will go nuclear. But for those money junkies who have their own underground prepper bunkers all ready to go, it's a gamble. Yeah, we're risking incinerating the surface of planet Earth, but if we pull this off, they're all going to be our slaves for the next 150 years, and that's the way they think.
Yeah, it's really, it's unfortunate. The next topic that I wanted to go to, and this is not getting a whole lot of coverage in the Western press, except for a couple of articles on boat people. And it's why the Rohingyas are willing to risk everything to flee Myanmar. Now, a majority of Rohingya Muslims live in Rakhine, a Buddhist majority state in West Myanmar. The group says that its members are descended from Arab traders and have lived in the area for hundreds of years. Many people in Myanmar, including prominent political and religious leaders, consider the Rohingyas Bengalis, who migrated to Myanmar illegally and therefore have no right to live in the country. In 1982, the government approved a law that officially restricted citizenship to members of ethnic groups it said had been settled in modern-day Myanmar prior to 1823. The Rohingyas were not considered one of these groups, and the members became effectively stateless. The lack of citizenship deprives Rohingyas of basic rights, including access to education, freedom of movement, land rights, the protection of their property, and the right to marry freely. This is awful. And the government of Myanmar, it's headed toward an international disaster. People are on boats with no food, and there are no countries willing to take them in. And, you would think that some of the Arab countries, with all of their money, would at least offer some kind of temporary shelter.
Well, this idea of Arab countries with all their money, that's not as true as it once was. Because those Arab countries were selling their oil to the United States. The United States' use of oil has declined as the economy has. And the oil price suppression war that was intended to harm Russia has also harmed many of the Arab economies. And so they're looking at coming up on shortfalls themselves.
I think this law needs to be changed, and those responsible for not changing it need to be put in the unblinking glare of universal public upset and contempt. And I never thought I would have to say this during this lifetime, but apparently the Rohingyas are getting brutalized and abused by the Buddhists. I never thought this lifetime I'd have to say, watch out, here come the Buddhists. Because this is really sad. Because a couple of the great foundational concepts of Buddhism are compassion and tolerance. And it looks like those two concepts have really hit the skids here.
Yeah, when the Buddhists start going violent, you're in a real bad situation there. Okay.
The next thing I'd like to talk about is apparently in California, anti-vaxxers have been stalking allegedly stalking.
I was going to say people. Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly stalking
because
lobbyists.
And I looked at this story very carefully. This looks to be a PR stunt to build sympathy for the pro-vaccine parties. Oh, those because they don't want to address the concerns raised by the people who are raising concerns about vaccines. So it's easier to portray them as, they're bad, evil people. They're stalking the pro-vaccine people. They're stalkers. They're conspiracy. In order to trick the public from actually looking at the concerns of people. You know, like this vaccine, they had another vaccine disaster in Mexico.
Yeah.
Vaccinated a bunch of kids in this village. 75% of the kids who got the vaccine either died or are now in the hospital. And there is a real concern that in their desperation to build profitability for these vaccine companies, governments are willing to go along and say, yeah, well, you know, our economy's in trouble. How we're going to save it? Well, we're going to make people buy products they don't actually want and don't actually need.
And I'd like to speak a minute to the anti-vaxxers, and I understand your concerns. I have a lot of the same concerns, too. Please don't do anything that is going to enable the press to kukify you. If this does get passed, fight it through the court system peacefully all the way up into the Supreme Court if you have to, but please don't use violence.
I don't think they are. I think it's a demonization campaign.
Okay.
We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire, what is your next topic?
There was a very interesting article written by Robert Perry, and it's called Obama's Strategic Shift. I don't know how right this guy is, but he says that the only game-saving play open to Obama now, in response to recent Saudi-backed escalation of Sunni extremism in Syria and Iraq, as well as the new right-wing racist government, say that 3 times quickly, in Israel, maybe to forge an alliance with Iran and Russia as a counterforce in the Middle East that could save Syria's relatively secular regime and reverse gains by the Islamic State inside Iraq. Mike, not gonna happen.
I don't think so because, first of all, the United States does not want ISIS gains reversed inside Syria. And again, ISIS is just a broad paintbrush of propaganda that is used to conceal from the American people what's really going on. In the case of Iraq, Libya, and Yemen, you're dealing with people who are trying to take their country back from U.S. puppet rule, and the U.S. just paints them all as ISIS so that you'll think about the horrible videotapes of beheadings and do your 2-minute hate and say, yes, go to war against them. We don't need to know anymore past that. In Syria, the U.S. government is using the ISIS paintbrush to conceal the fact that the forces fighting against Bashar al-Assad are hired mercenaries, supported and supplied by, among others, the United States government. That's what's coming out of that Benghazi email.
Well, I would tend to agree with you very much. I frankly think Obama is trying, by deploying ISIS, to get Americans to go along with a third invasion of Iraq, an overthrow of al-Assad, and a re-invasion of Libya. And I have a short memo for President Obama based on a statement of the character Tony Soprano. Forget about it.
Okay.
There will be no support for U.S. troops on the ground. And he's sending a bunch of tanks. Those are useless without skilled operators, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, look what happened to the tanks up in Iraq. You know, when Ramadi fell, the Iraqi troops just abandoned all of that. So now they're sending in a bunch of anti-tank missiles. So you, the American taxpayer, get to pay for the weapons on both sides of the conflict.
And where are the operators for these weapons? I mean, they're saying they're sending tanks, but you have to have someone who has the craft and knows how to make it work.
Well, in theory, the Iraqi troops are being trained to operate these tanks. But the reality is that we've all seen World War II tanks in museums, and it's not a big trick to drive them. Modern tanks are a little more complex. The driver position is pretty much the same. He just does what he's told and points the body of the tank where it's supposed to go. But operating the laser gun sights and various other computer systems to put the ordnance on the target, that's a little bit trickier, and that's on the assumption that all of these systems are working perfectly, which very often they are not coming from the factory, because thanks to the U.S. military-industrial complex profitability agenda. And certainly when you go into combat, the performance of these systems can be degraded very, very quickly.
Yes. You know, I have to wonder, Mike, how long would an intelligent person take to learn all the logistics of a tank? How long would you think in real time?
Well, remember, Richard Hammond did that on one of his little shows where they took him out, and they were able to teach him to drive the tank in about 2 days of intensive training involving simulators.
But the weapons?
The weapons, that would probably take a little bit longer, but you don't train one person to do everything unless it's the tank commander who's got to step in when somebody gets killed.
Right.
It's all very specialized, and mostly it's about team building. But, I think the Iraqi forces, the reason they retreated from Ramadi is they are no more comfortable firing on their own countrymen than the soldiers in Kiev. And they understand it's not ISIS, they're not evil incarnate. These are our fellow people of Iraq, and they've got a legitimate gripe. They want to take their country back. What's going on in Iraq today is exactly what happened in Iran in 1979, and that's why the U.S. is trying as hard as they can to keep it from happening again, because the momentum for these countries to take themselves back from foreign puppet rule is beginning to build. And at some point, I think it's even going to reach here in the United States of America, where the American people are going to stand up and say, we need to get rid of everybody in Washington, D.C., who's out there saying, I'm a friend of Israel, and we've got to give Israel more of your money, and we've got to send your children to fight Israel's enemies. And meanwhile, of course, our roads are crumbling, our bridges are on the verge of collapse, trains are derailing, and this country, the condition of this country, is very obviously in decline.
Michael, let me ask you a question. I know that the National Transportation and Safety has been doing an evaluation. Did they ever come up with a legitimate reason for that derailing that happened?
Yeah, it was going more than twice the speed limit through that section of track.
How did that happen, though?
They're still not saying, and obviously Amtrak is trying to throw the trail off onto the fact that, some kind of a projectile hit the train, which even if it had happened, that does not justify the train being driven at twice the normal speed. Some people are out there saying the new computer system may have had an engineering defect in it, because that particular train had a new computer-controlled engine put into it only a few months ago.
I mean, don't the people who are managing and owning the trains test this stuff before people are actually on them? I mean, that seems to be a logical thing to do to make sure that there's not going to be a problem, because you don't want that happening.
Well, some of these computer-based issues may not surface for many months and require certain conditions of whatever is being sensed for. I mean, we know now that there is a known issue with the flight control computer of the Airbus 330, where it has on at least 3, possibly 4 occasions, put the plane into a descent that the pilots could not take back control from.
Irreversible?
Well, in the first 3 cases, it was reversible. They were able to reset the system and recycle it. But a lot of people are thinking that most recent plane crash that they're blaming on a suicidal pilot may have been another one of these computer lockups.
Wow, that's amazing that this stuff can still happen. And that
the reason is the money junkies are in charge of production and testing and development, and their attitude is, it seems to be working. Let's put it on out there. We need to make our money now, and if there's a problem, the end user will get back to us. And that's one thing when you're talking about a Microsoft product sitting on this computer, and you say, it's not working, here's why, and you complain, versus a mission-critical system on an aircraft or a locomotive or a ship that stops doing what it's supposed to do at a time when lives are at stake.
I remember my late father was an aircraft instrument mechanic, and if you ever flew, you would have wanted Spencer to have checked out the instruments, because the company he worked for had a love-hate relationship with him. They knew that if he inspected the instrument thoroughly, that nothing was going to go wrong with it. And but he would hold up departures if it didn't calibrate out absolutely correctly, and he stood his ground, and he said, no, I'm not signing off on this. I'm not signing off until I know it's absolutely perfect. And, I think we need a little bit more of that in the 21st century. It's like that chief
engineer at the Onagawa power station, who would not tolerate cutbacks to the safety systems, and they're the only power station that survived the quake and tsunami here. All right, we've got about maybe 30 seconds until the next commercial break here. You want to tease your next story?
Yes, I think I do. Saudi Arabia is going to purchase nuclear arms from Pakistan.
Well, why not? Saudi Arabia funded Pakistan's nuclear program.
But
But, you know, I think what's going on here, I think Saudi Arabia just played Obama for a fool. And when we come back from the commercial break, I'm going to go into that in a little more detail.
Okay.
But this idea of trying to placate Israel and get the P5+1, I think Obama made a major mistake, and Saudi Arabia took advantage of it. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today here. And following on the discussion going into the commercial break here, President Obama, in trying to remove resistance to the completion of the P5+1 deal, because it's going to look good next to his name in the history books, is basically saying to the Middle Eastern nations, go ahead and arm up, we'll support you, we'll help you. They're giving a whole bunch of new weapons to Israel, saying, see, you don't have to be afraid of Iran any longer, you can get whatever you need here. And Saudi Arabia is taking advantage of this permission, if you will, from the United States of America to purchase nuclear weapons from Pakistan. Now, Saudi Arabia's government actually funded Pakistan's development of nuclear weapons. And I'm sure there's going to be no problem with Pakistan saying, sure, here, buy a couple of them. And I don't think Saudi Arabia is buying them because they're worried about an invasion from Iran, because Iran has not started a war of aggression in over 200 years. This is Saudi Arabia's chance to achieve nuclear parity with Israel.
Yep.
And yes, Israel has hundreds of weapons, and Saudi Arabia is only going to have maybe 10 or 20, but that's all they need as a deterrent from Israel. Because look how small Israel is. And realize that just 10 well-placed nuclear weapons will, in fact, take it off the face of the earth.
Yep.
And so now Saudi Arabia doesn't have to worry about Israeli interference any longer, and they did it basically with the blessing of the White House. And I think Saudi Arabia just played this very smart. I think their new king is definitely somebody to be reckoned with. I would think so. Mike, do you think that this is going to cause a cascade effect with other nations in the region saying, okay, Israel's got them, Saudi Arabia's got them, I think we need to get them? I think there's going to be a regional arms race now. Yeah. And that was something certainly Israel does not want to see happen, because they have exerted their dominion over the area all these years with these other countries, knowing that Israel does have nuclear weapons and they do not. And so this is actually going to backflash against Israel, because now Israel may have the nuclear weapons. They're not going to be seen as willing to use them because of the retaliation. Yeah, so you think maybe this is not necessarily a bad thing for the region? No, I don't think it's a bad thing at all. Okay. Israel was so manic about Iran not getting a nuclear weapon with which to thwart Israel's projection of power in the region, and now all of a sudden Saudi Arabia is getting one in through the side door. Right. And I'm sure over in Israel, Netanyahu is saying, wait, what? What? We're not the sole nuclear power any longer? Nope. Not that we were before. And if you say that we are, you're an anti-Semite, Jew hater who wants Hitler to come back and gas Jewish babies. And the idea of Iran being this terrible, terrible place, I will tell you, and I'll tell our readership and our listenership, Tehran's on my bucket list. I would love to see it once this lifetime because of the history and the music. And if you ever get a chance to see this on video, it's called Don't Tell Mother I'm in Iran, by a very affable young Jewish videographer who was investigating how well the Jewish community is flourishing right now, because Judaism, Baha'i, Christianity, under the 79 Constitution, are protected religious minorities. I think it's a lot different than we're made to believe. And I'd love to talk to the young people in Iran, people in their 20s who are, let's say, finishing their college education. What do you see as your future and the country's future? How do you want to see it move forward? And I think we would be very surprised by some of those answers. Well, we all know that, we're propagandized about the enemy. They're bad, they're evil, they deserve to be killed, blah, 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 blah. But Israel and Israel's supporters in the U.S. government want Iran to be smashed for the same reason they wanted Iraq to be smashed. These were countries that weren't willing to be pushed around by Israel, weren't willing to basically do as they were told. And notice that in this National Defense Bill for 2016, part of it is to give authorization to break off Kurdistan from Iraq.
and, divide it that way as well.
Oh, we've known
Slice
all along. Ultimately, the
pieces.
Balkanization of Iraq was the long-term plan because lots of little tiny Middle Eastern countries are very easy for Israel to bully with their nuclear arsenal. And that's the reason, that's the real agenda for Israel going into Iran. They want to break them apart into smaller countries that can be threatened and bullied. And now Israel is going to have to look at Saudi Arabia, and relations between the two countries are cordial, I will grant you now.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, Israel is dealing with a Saudi Arabia that is a regional economic powerhouse and now a nuclear-armed state.
Right.
The balance of power in the Middle East just shifted dramatically at a time when Israel's image around the world is in serious decline.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, hopefully peacefully.
I would like to think so.
And Mike, what do you think the chances are for the P5+1 because of all the crud that the United States is trying to put in there that wasn't in the original agreement?
Well, it's going to come down to Obama and his State Department because all of these new demands coming in are being brought in by all of Israel's minions in our government, and in particular, the demand that Iran allow constant inspections of their non-nuclear military forces, which were never part of the original issue. The original issue is Iran building a nuclear weapon? How do we prevent them from building a nuclear weapon? And all of a sudden, at the last minute, they're adding this requirement that all of Iran's military forces, conventional, are open to international inspection, meaning open to being spied on all the time. And Iran's not going to go for that. They did the same thing in Iraq when Saddam Hussein was out there saying, yes, we'll get the inspectors in so you can satisfy yourselves, I don't have nuclear weapons.
Right.
And then the U.S. came in and said, well, we want to inspect all of your military. And Iraq did catch the inspectors carrying out acts of espionage on Iraq. And again, it's called negotiation creep, and it's a tactic to derail a deal. When you don't really want the deal to go through, you just wait till the last second when it looks like it's all going to happen, then you say, just one more thing. We want to inspect your conventional weapons. Just one more thing, we want to talk to your nuclear scientists. Just one more thing, we want to be able to inspect, surprise inspections on Ayatollah Khamenei's residence, just in case he's hiding nuclear bombs under his bed. And no, they did that in Iraq too. They wanted to have open inspections anytime they wanted on Saddam Hussein's residence. And, that's like Britain coming in and demanding the right to inspect the White House anytime they feel like it. And these are designed to derail the agreement. Now, there's only about another week to go on the deadline. It was sounding very positive, but at the last second, the American negotiators, who appear to be listening more to the war hawks and to Israel than to Obama and the State Department, are in there adding all these new expectations, demands, and requirements. At this point, it doesn't look like it's going to be passed, and even if it is, the U.S. has already set up a situation where they can say Iran is not complying with the agreement because Obama has announced to the American people that Iran agreed to certain things in the framework agreement that are not actually there. So they can sign the P5+1, and Iran go back to just minding its own business, and the U.S. can come out and say, well, Iran agreed that we were going to be able to come in and inspect their blenders of mass destruction, and Iran is going to say that was never part of the agreement, and the U.S. will say they're in violation, and the war is going to be on. Unfortunately, we have too many people in this world, in this country, in both the government and the financial system, who right now see a new World War III as what's best for them and their agenda. They're going to make lots of money off of it. They're going to get rid of all the useless eaters. They're going to complete their plan to force private central banking on the entire globe. Whatever their individual agendas are, there are way too many people whose individual agendas overlap at the point where a new world war is what they all want to have. And
this reminds me, Mike, of a line in the second Sherlock Holmes film where the Moriarty character said, a war is coming and I want a corner on the bullets and the bandages. And the big corporations have just that. War is big business. It's big business for the defense contractors. It's bigger business for the bankers.
These global bankers love wars. Wars are their richest harvest, and they don't care how many of your kids have to die to make them richer. There's the music. It's time for us to head into the Memorial Day weekend. Please be very careful in traffic. Don't drink and drive. Remember, those cops are out there propping up their city budgets on the tickets they will write to you this weekend. So be extra careful. We'll be back live on Wednesday of next week. Aloha, America.